Hello, my name is Harry Wolf, and I was born in Reading, Ohio, and I live now in Westchester, Ohio at 8024 LeBlanc Way. And I've lived up here for about 30 years or 40, whatever. Lost track here. But anyway, when I was a child, I went to Reading High School in Reading, and my brother was already in the Navy, so I decided I would go to the Navy. So I became a reservist. And while I was in high school, I went to meetings and things like that. He was on the USS Kitty Hawk on the West Coast, and I ended up on the USS Randolph, which was on the East Coast. And so we were both in the Navy at the same time, but I was a reservist at that time. And when I went to boot camp when I was in high school on Christmas break, and as would be, we got to horsed around in the barracks, and everybody had a little free time, and so we were doing handstands on the bunks, and I was doing a handstand between two bunks. And about the time I got up there, as you well know, the floors are waxed and very slick. Well, the bunks slid out from underneath me, and I did a face plant on the floor. Broke my glasses, on one lens broke, and but it was close to the end, and I suffered through with one eye. And I was totally embarrassed because I'd be on a train, because we had to take a train up there to the Great Lakes, and then I had to take a train back home. And I didn't want anybody to see me with one lens missing. I really felt kind of weird. That was kind of an odd thing that I went through with. You had to be a high school kid to understand that. But anyway, we had a lot of things there. At the Great Lakes, if you've never been to boot camp, especially for high school kids that were up there taking their tests and doing all the stuff we had to do, they told us if we didn't pass the tests, they were going to keep us, and we wouldn't be able to go back home until we did pass the tests. So it gave you a lot of incentive, had us scared to death, so that we would be able to. They wanted us to pass our tests and put some effort into it, and so we did. So, but anyway, we went to Norfolk, is where after I went active duty, which was I graduated from high school, and I went to the I got out in June, and it was after the first year I went active, and I went to Norfolk, Virginia, and at that time that's when I got on the aircraft carrier. And we had, I was assigned a guy, a petty officer. They said, this guy's your boss. You do what he tells you to do. So I did. Well, come to find out that there was a couple other petty officers in the division, and they came down there and they wanted me to do something. And I told them, well, you see this other guy, and if he tells me to do it, I'll do it. Which is not a real smart thing to do. And so what I did was I ended up becoming colonel of the urinal. So they installed. I was a privileged character. I got to go down, and I was the proud owner of 12 urinals, 20 sinks, 12 showers, and 12 toilets. And every night I got to go down there and clean those after everybody went to bed. It was exciting. It was wonderful. And at the time we were heading towards Guantanamo Bay, and the whole ship was going under a training exercise. Because we were anti-submarine warfare, that's what we did on our ship. So everybody was going through training positions and everything like that. And so while I was down there, we was probably underway. I was probably on the ship for a couple of months, and I was still the colonel. And we were underway one time, and they came down and they inspected my cleaning space, and they laid their hands on the ledge, and. My carrier, it was CVS 15, and it was the USS Randolph, is what it was. And so these petty officers came down and they told me to do something, and I said, well, you see this other guy, and here again, that's how I ended up in the urinals. And so then they said, this is dirty, and I said, sometimes I said things I shouldn't have said. So, but anyway, they said, well, we just checked it, and it was dirty. And I said, no, it wasn't, because I just cleaned it. Well, they got kind of mad at me. And if you don't know what a marlin spike is, it's a long piece of steel with a point on it, and they used to weave lines with it. And so they said, we're going to take a marlin spike to you and we're going to wear you out on the fantail. Well, I looked at them and I figured I could take them. So I said, let's go. And they looked at each other and the next thing you know, they said, go back to work. See, I was ranked in the state of Ohio in wrestling, and I had a little confidence in what I was doing. But I figured I could take them anyway. It didn't matter. And so in 3 days, I was up on top, and I was in charge of 40 men. Don't ask me what happened there, because I was just shooting my mouth off there, and I should learn how to be quiet every once in a while. And it has a tendency to get me in trouble sometimes. So, but anyway, it was an experience, and it was a growing experience because I was so young. I was still 20, 19 or 20. I wasn't very old at all. And so, but anyway, we had a wonderful time there, and I was in charge of these guys. And these guys were all rednecks they were from New Orleans, New York City, the Bronx. They were from every hardneck, rough area, and it was an unbelievable thing. These guys were all like cutthroats, you might say. So one day I was in charge, and I was down there in the locker room, and we got to horsing around just as young fellows do. And this guy was about 6'5", and he weighed about 220, 230, and he got into it with me for some reason, and I honestly can't remember what it was all about. But I had him down, and he couldn't breathe, and they pulled me off of him, and from that time on, he and I were good friends, and nobody challenged me because this guy was so big, such a big fellow that I had him down. I guess played for keeps, It was one of those deals, crazy kids, But anyway, so I was in charge of those men, and at that time, and it was interesting sometimes the way some of these guys approached it, but I had the bluff on them, and that worked out good for me. But anyway, we had a situation one time where we were in Norfolk, and we were tied up to a pier. And I still remember the first time I saw an aircraft carrier. I thought, this thing is going to sink if they ever untie it, because it's going to happen. I just knew it. It was all steel. It was huge. But anyway, we were tied at Norfolk, and we had come in to tie up, and we had a certain amount of time to be out there, and we were getting ready to leave, and they usually bring tugs out on the backside of the ship, and then they throw the ropes off, and then the tugs pull you out into the waterways. Well, the guys that came over to throw our ropes off, they threw all of our ropes off, except for my line, and there was a single line. What you have is a single line, and then you have it doubles up again. Each one of these lines, that's what gives it the strength. Well, just so happened that day the wind was blowing the ship away from the pier. So they always put a barrier in about midways in the ship, and nobody did it on the front, but on the back, I was the only line that was holding the ship there against the pier. And I had about 10 guys there holding the lines, feeding the lines through the ballards and all the things that you do to hold the ship in place and take the strength. So we only had one line there. So I told them all to lay down and hold on to the rope and do what I tell them to do. And so I stood up next to the handrail and bounced my foot on this wire rope. The wire rope was about this big whenever it started out, and when it got down so small, I would be tapping my foot on it, and I'd tell them to slack off a little bit. And every time we'd slack off a little bit, the rope would stretch a little bit more, and they were called from the bridge, tie that rope off. And if I tied the rope off, it broke because it was just too much. It was going to be too much. We were controlling our swing from the pier. So after a couple of conversations with the bridge, I jerked the phone out of the wall and threw it in the corner. And we did it. We kept the ship in place. It still pivoted a little bit. It still pivoted, but this line was the only one that held the whole back of the ship on next to the pier. Well, they wanted to throw me in jail, and they should have probably, because the captain said tie it off, and that's whenever I took the phone out. But every bosun mate on the ship agreed that what I had done was the best thing to do, because because if you broke that line, you'd have lost all control. And so anyway, I got away with one there. I should have spent some time in the brig. I really should have, but that's once again, that's another one of those things that your head just gets in the way. But anyway, these are some stories that I remember that that are kind of crazy, and it really shouldn't have happened, but it did. But anyway, when we were in Cuba, we did a lot of training on gun tubs, and we had there was gun tubs on all four corners of the ship, and they had an officer would run the radar, and he would control where the projectiles would explode, because the projectile would be shot out, and then it would explode in so much time, and it would be timed to try to take out a target that they pull across on a plane, and then this cable, and you'd try to hit this flag. So I was the guy that ended up taking the projectiles out of the can, out of the harnesses, and putting them into the barrel. But meanwhile, somebody throws a 35-pound cartridge in behind it. I threw my projectile in. I reach up and I ram it. And it was an experience that I don't know why I got to be the one to do that, but it was unbelievable. We shot the target down once, but then we found out that it wasn't the target we shot. We cut the cable in two. So we worked at it, but it was kind of funny whenever you figured out what was going on. But these are things that you learn. Otherwise, you're sitting in an area and you're going through chemical warfare. And you go through classes of that while you're sitting there waiting for your time to go on watch or to go on the gun tubs and do all the things that we did while we were in Cuba. It was Guantanamo Bay. We anchored out, and we would go in there and from time to time on boats get some leave time there. But let's see here. The guns were actually 5-inch 38 millimeter guns, and they were huge. And the pistols, the bullets were this big. It was 54-pound projectiles is what I put in there. And it was something else. We did, it was an exciting time, and you learn how to do things. And I'm slowly learning how to keep my mouth shut. That's one of the things that my biggest problem was, I think. So anyway, there was a lot of times that when we were underway, we only spent 30 days a year in port in the United States. The rest of the time we were in Italy, France, Spain, Germany, Scotland, Ireland. I think we hit every country in Europe. I got to go down into Berlin and saw the wall before it was tore down. We saw all that. I took a tour bus, and they told us everything. We saw all this stuff, and it was an interesting time. It really was. It was because you just can't imagine what Berlin was like. And we came up a river to get in there, and we anchored out. We did all these things. But as far as time in the piers, we never had a whole much time there at home in Norfolk. We never did. Never had as much time there. But as I was going along, ships have a tendency to refuel. They kind of need some oil, and they have something called a tanker. And these tankers come alongside, and then we exchange lines, and then we hook a cable to our wall, and then we pull hoses over, and we attach the hoses to our ship, and then the tanker pumps the oil in. But in the minute, while we're going along, we have a certain speed, but the boats are doing this, one thing and another. And so I was the guy that ended up running the winches that keeps the big main line at a certain height and keep the hoses out of the water and keep them from getting tangled up. And so I was the guy that ended up running the winches. And so one day we were running the winches, and the call came down. They said, there's a fishing boat out here, and he's in the way. And by rights, fishing boats have the right of way. They have like balls that they hang on their mast. But the problem was there was $75,000 worth of radar on it. It was a Russian spy ship that was actually out there. He was keeping track of our fleet, what we were doing. So the captain told him, said, we're not moving. We're going to go right on. This guy was set up to go right down between our ship and the oiler. And that's what he did. He ended up going. He came right between me, the aircraft carrier, and the oiler. So I had to raise the hoses up and keep everything out of the way so this we didn't have an incident. But it was I couldn't believe it was happening. This guy should have went ahead and got out of the way, but he wouldn't do it because he thought because he was a fish, he had the fishing balls up that he had the right of way. But these are crazy things that took place, you know, and it was pretty wild. It really was. It was a dangerous thing to do, really was, because that boat could have got just hit the side of the ship and had problems, and the oiler could have. You don't want an oiler to go up. So there was a lot of things that went on that whole thing. We had a time when we were in Italy. We went into a port. We anchored out, and we all used Liberty launches to go in. At that one time, I was a bow hook. In other words, I rode the front of the ship. The boat, and these boats carry 50 men. And then we had somebody as a captain, Captain Coxon, and he run the boat, and I would up there and I'd jump off and tie the boat up and everything. While we were in this particular port, a storm came up, and it was so violent, and there was so much groundswell from this storm that we had to stay in there with the boats to keep them from floating up onto the pier that we were tied up to, because it was so much groundswell and waves were coming in, and it was so bad. And so we had to stay there and hold them in. And then we finally got, in the morning, we got a capability of loading the boats up, and people started getting onto the boats because it was down just a little. But the swells were still so bad, and the wind was blowing so bad, we were actually dragging our anchor on that aircraft carrier. And it would move and would swing because of the way the wind was going. And if you've ever been close to an aircraft carrier, the main deck is pretty high up off the water, but these swells were about half the height of everybody on the boat would have to go along, jump to the accommodation ladder halfway up the ship to get off. That's every time the swell would go up, they would jump off. And of course, I was the most intelligent one. I was the one in the front of the boat holding the rope up there and tying it up and making sure we don't get away. So we did a lot of things like that. It was just unbelievable to believe that the wind could be that bad and the storms could be that bad. So, but we finally ended up getting underway. But it was an experience, something you don't forget, because it was pretty scary. While we were in, I believe it was Italy or one of those coastal countries up there. We were anchored out, and I was on watch, and the division petty officer, the guy in charge, came around with a boat, and he said, "Come on." So I went down and jumped into the boat. I had no idea what he was talking about. There was two people that had had a sailboat out, and they got wrecked out on the reefs towards the coastline. And it was like 5 or 6 foot swells. It was really pretty rough. That's why they had a problem. So he took me out there, and he drove the thing, and he kept the boat off the coral reef. And he gave me the rope. He said, "Take that rope to that one guy." There was one guy was by the boat, and the other one was over on some lower coral reefs down farther. So I took the rope down to him, swam down there. And then after he got the rope and that guy towed it back, then I went on down to the other one and helped him get to a higher, where it was shallower water, but it was still coral reef. And if you ever want to know about whether those little spiny things hurt when you step on them, they do. But they were all over that reef. But then they shot a line over to me from a lifeboat, and then we hooked a longer rope, and we were towed back to the lifeboat, and then we went aboard the ship. The thing that was really exciting about after all this that I did, my division officer said, "Go wash your knife off and go back to watch. Go back to your watch." I thought, at least I get a little, benefit of doing all this stuff. I'm a hero, Well, not really. I didn't think nothing of it. I really didn't, because I was a good swimmer. It didn't bother me. I didn't think anything of it, but I thought, well, maybe I can get something out of this, but it didn't happen. It didn't happen. So these are some of the crazy things that people do, and afterwards you think about it, and it's really funny. All right.
All right.
If you've never been in the north, up in the North Atlantic, up above Europe, in the North Sea, it's the land of the midnight sun, and all you have is dusk from 12 to 1 o'clock at night, and then the sun comes back up. It's kind of a unique situation, but the water up there was like a lake. Well, we had, like I said, we had a bunch of wild Indians in that were in our division, and we had fixed the lockers up and did some things. Well, somebody came in and damaged them, scraped them all up, did all kinds of damage to them, but nobody would tell. Well, in the Navy, you're guaranteed 1 hour sleep, and you're guaranteed your meals, and you had to go on watch, and you did all these things. So what happens is, while we were underway up in the North Sea, we were painting the side of the ship, because as a punishment to these guys. So we'd throw a net over the side of the ship. They'd have to go down into that net, paint, do things like that. We did all that because no one would tell who done it. You know, it was just an odd thing. It was one of those things that these guys do. You know, but we had the North Sea is very unusual, very unusual. The North Sea was calm at the time, and the winds coming in. You're way up there, and so you get to. You end up getting to do a lot of things. And after, I'm just remembering some highlights of different things, but whenever I got ready to get out, they always give you this re-up enlistment interview. And so my the division officer was sitting there with his hands like this, and he was making notes. And he asked me, he said, "Do you want to re-up?" I said, "Well, I don't know if I want to do it or not." He said, "Well, the Navy has a lot of security and benefits to stay it in, And he's sitting there shaking like this. His hand was shaking. I said, "Well, you know what? My dad made it. I guess I can make it." And once again, I still haven't learned everything I needed to learn. But anyway, the reason he was shaking is he was getting ready to leave to go to Vietnam as a gunboat captain. And they didn't last very long whenever they went up the rivers on those gunboat captains. And so that's why it was an unbelievable situation there. Whenever I went active duty, I was a seaman apprentice, and then I got to be a seaman, and then I studied, and within a year and 2 months, I think it was, I was a third-class petty officer, and so it made me even have more control and more responsibilities as I went along. It was quite an experience, but you run into a lot of people on the ship. And whenever I was on vacation at different times up and down the coast, I would run into every once in a while some of the people that were in my division in a civilian life. It's kind of wild how that had really happened. But you would run into somebody, somebody would be working as a maintenance person in a hotel, and this guy, it was a guy that was in my division. So there was a lot of things like that took place. I had some guys that were from here in Cincinnati that lived around here that I used to ride down to meetings with, and I saw one of them was on the ship with me, and then one guy, he got married right after he got out of active duty, and I went to Chicago to his wedding. Okay, well there was a time there that when we were going to port of calls all over Europe, and one time we we went up a river that went up towards into Germany, and then we anchored out in this bay that we ran into, and then I took a tour bus that went into Berlin, and this was back when the wall was still in place. And so, because I took a tour bus, I got to hear a lot of the history and all the things, and the things that's kind of stuck with my brain was that there's an area called the Brandenburg Gate, and there was 2 guards there, and I asked, well, why do you have to have 2 guards? He said they used to just leave one there, and so but then the one guard, he'd defect, and he'd come to the West Berlin area, and so they had to put 2 guards there so somebody could shoot the other one if he decided to defect. It was kind of a strange thing, it really was. But yeah, as you go along the Berlin Wall there in the bus, you could see where there was wreaths and different things where people had died trying to get across that wall. Something we take for granted. People were dying just to get out of that place. But it was a great. It was if you look behind the Berlin Wall towards there's big buildings back there, but all the windows are bricked up, except for some, and you'll see where the bricks are busted out. And that's where people have busted out of those windows and used a rope and tried to go down and so they could get across the Berlin Wall to try to do this. And there was a lot of areas there in Berlin that on the East Berlin side that there was barbed wire and all kinds of cross beams of steel and everything to prevent people from getting out of Eastern Europe, Eastern Berlin, into West Berlin because they wanted to be there. There was one bridge that you could go across and go into. I guess they used that for commerce, but you had to have papers and you had to have all this stuff just to go in and out of East and West Berlin. They go that way. In Berlin itself, there was we went into Berlin, and you see all the new buildings that were put up, that were built. Yeah, that's where we're going. And they built all of the buildings. We rebuilt Berlin after the war. But in town, there's a church, and it had been bombed out. And they left it exactly the way it was, as a reminder to everybody what war can do for them. Even though they replaced all these other buildings, that church was there as a remembrance of what war does. And that's what they did there. So it was quite interesting to see all these things. As you go through here, there was, of course, it wasn't long after that. It was several years later, but of course, all that wall came down, and I can remember seeing that in my head. As far as this was quite an event here. So, but anyway, we went to Holland while we were up in that area, and we came into a port there, and I went inside, and we saw they have a lot of these troughs. They were like canals all over the town, and instead of having trains, buses, or trucks with semi-trailers, they use these boats to do their transporting of their commerce up and down this river. And the people that ran those boats lived on the boat. And I saw this one lady there. She actually had wooden shoes she was wearing to clean the deck. Whenever they was cleaning the wood, the whole thing, they used to clean it up, scrub it, and one thing or another. And that's what she did. And it was kind of an interesting thing there. It was pretty wild. I never saw anybody wear. I've seen pictures of wooden shoes and seen them on decorations on the wall, but I never saw anybody wear one. We also ended up going into Ireland, and Ireland was like a very green, hilly area, but you could see castles in different places up in the hills where people had their castles at that time. But then they had a park down there in the middle, and they had a big. They were doing a jig on this stage, and it was entertainment for the people that wanted to see it. And these guys with their Irish skirts and stuff like that, and they had their music and they did everything like that. I kind of stayed away from those kind of guys. I don't know what that was all about, but anyway, we did all that, and as well as going into the other countries now. You found out when you got into a lot of these ports of call in Europe, like Spain and Italy and France and places like that, and even England, they wanted your money. So if you eat and they go into these bars and they do a lot of stuff, they spend all their money, but they don't really want you there. They really don't like us. They didn't like us. That was something that stuck with us when we were there. Now we went to Berlin, not Berlin, but London. I'm sorry, London. We went into London, and we took a river, went up a river to Portsmouth, and then I took a tour bus into London, because that's usually what you want to do, is just to see everything, and it was pretty exciting. It was. You see the square, Trafalgar. I think it was Trafalgar Square, and then there's Piccadilly Circus, and then there was a square there that if you had a social gripe, You could set up a bucket and stand up there and just say whatever you wanted to say. If you had religious statements you wanted to make, you could do it there without anybody saying anything to you. But I think the funniest thing that stuck in my head whenever I saw this was that there's a guy who had his wife, she was about 50 years old or whatever, a short lady, and he was trying to sell her. And he said, for $1, you could buy her. She could dance. Watch. And she'd do a jig, and he said she could sing too. It was all just a joke. It was funny, but that's what he was doing. He said, now for $2, he would just go back and forth, and it was hilarious. And he would sing with her, and they would do a little thing. It was really funny. These are things that took place in this square that anybody, no matter what country, no matter what belief, you could be downplaying the government there in England. It doesn't matter. Anything said in that square was okay. You were allowed to do it, and so that's what they did. We also went to an area a city that was called Naples, and you've ever heard of the Isle of Capri? And back then, I heard more about it than I hear now. But the Isle of Capri was an island is out from of Naples, and on the Isle of Capri is a small island. You could see it right there from the pier. It was that small. It was right in that area, but there was like a one-lane road around that thing, and I never really saw anything that made it so special. But I was there. Whatever. But anyway, I ran boats. I ran the Liberty launch from the ship to the pier. That's what we did. We'd load up. We had boats that was like hold 50 men, and we'd bring them from the ship, take them back to the pier transport them. So happened that I happened to take a holiday trip back in the 70s, and we ended up going right by the same pier that I had brought the Liberty launches into there in Naples, and then we went on up to Pompeii and all that stuff. It's all in that same vicinity. So, but anyway, we had it was quite a trip. There was a lot of cities and stuff. Like I said, one of the main things that you'll find out is that the people wanted your money, but they did not like you. And that's kind of the way it was, and it was very easy to pick up on that. We spent most of our time at sea, except for 30 days in the country. We come in into the United States for 30 days, and a lot of the guys would go home and things, but I never did get to go home. They would go and leave and do one thing and another, but I never did do that because it cost money, and I didn't get paid much. But my mom, they had one day where they had Parents' Day, and she flew out there. And I'm amazed that she did it. But she flew and she got on the aircraft carrier, and they take them out in the bay and they do an aerial display for them and all this stuff, and they're allowed to be on the ship. And it was really amazing as to what really took place. And I was glad she was able to do that because my brother, being on the West Coast, she could never go that far to do anything like that. But whenever we had that day there in Norfolk, she came and she got on the ship and enjoyed the trip. It was quite an experience for her too. A lot of things that was kind of unusual is when we go on vacations, years after we got out of the Navy, I would go down the coast to different things on the East Coast there, different cities. We go into a restaurant and there would be a guy that was in my division working there, and we had that several times. That's happened. But it's really a small world when you think about it sometimes. And so it was pretty unique that we ran into these guys and had some time to talk and see what was going on. When I got back out of the Navy, it wasn't long after I got home that one of the shipmates that I had, he lived in Chicago, and he was going to get married. So I went up to Chicago for his wedding, and we got a chance to spend a little time with him, and then he got married, and I drove back, and then I had some other friends that were in town here. The barber, he was a barber, and he was on ship there, but he was here in Cincinnati, and so I made a whole connection with his family, and we would, used to go down and visit him and them, and it was kind of hard to believe that you could hang up, you could still hang and know these guys and still talk to them back then. Now, whenever I first went in, I was a seaman apprentice, and then I got to be a seaman. And then I studied and I took the test, and I was a third-class petty officer when I got out. And so therefore, it was pretty much of an accomplishment because of what we had done. But you had to study to pass the test. It gave you a great deal of responsibility, and a lot of things had to be done. As a petty officer, you had to be in charge of a lot of men and do different jobs. A lot of the guys didn't like doing the jobs that you asked them to do, and you were to make sure that certain people were on watch and doing the things that they were supposed to do. So, but we had a lot of things like that I had accomplished. For me, being as young as I was, it was quite an experience and a learning experience for me. I finally did figure out how to keep my mouth shut though at a lot of stuff. I had a bad habit of just saying what I thought. I was always willing to do what I was told to do, but not anybody else. Just if somebody told me to do something, that's what I would do. But that's not the way it's supposed to be. You're supposed to listen to your superiors. So, but other than that, I can't think of anything else that I had accomplished at that time.